So in this conversation, I want to talk about nutrition as far as in the form of our energy systems that our body goes through and relate that to fat loss and how we would structure our nutrition plans. And so this is our nutrition part two, energy systems. Now our body goes through three energy systems when we are exerting energy. So our first system is going to be our creatine phosphate system. Now, when we think about this system, this is a pretty short duration system. This system is going to last about 45 to 60 seconds, and this system requires primarily ATP. And so when you think about creatine phosphate, you might think about creatine supplementation. And so the reason to add in a creatine supplement potentially for both men and women would be to increase the amount of ATP available to the muscles. So when you think about weight training, the more ATP that we have, the more muscular strength we can exert and the more muscular endurance that we'll have, which overall would ideally for those who focus on the bodybuilding or physique related goals is going to help us build more muscle or maintain muscle if we're dieting down. But as far as how that first energy system works, it's primarily going to function off of ATP, and it's going to you're going to think about our weight training sessions, or you might think about someone who's running wind sprints, short duration activities where you're exerting a maximal energy for a short period of time. The second energy system that we're going to transition into is going to be glycolysis. Now, this energy system you can think about as using carbohydrates, and it is going to be our body's preferred energy system. So this is where you're going to feel your best. And we think about this energy system as, say, an athlete who's playing basketball. Um, you might think about a CrossFitter who's doing a high intensity workout over, say, 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour. This person, this energy system is going to supply carbohydrates called glycogen to the muscle for those activities. And we're going to go through two sides of this. We're going to go through our fast glycolysis, which is going to transition from that creatine phosphate system. So even that person in the gym training, they're going to tap in a little bit into this fast glycolysis system while they're lifting weights. Or for sure, like again, that CrossFitter who is exerting a lot of energy doing more conditioning based workouts, and they're going to use that fast glycolysis system, which is going to be anywhere from that 1 minute to 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. Now, the thing to know about this energy system is it's always going to be a back and forth from going forward, going back, going forward, going back. And so we think about that slow glycolysis system, that's going to kick in, similarly, where it's like 5 to 10 minutes to say that 30 to 45-minute point, and kind of same thing where you're doing conditioning based workouts, you're going from that creatine phosphate system to that fast glycolysis and maybe into that slow glycolysis system. But so you're going to be going back and forth between those. But as far as our carbohydrate intake, when we are eating a carbohydrate based diet, this is going to be our preferred energy system. So if I'm working with an athlete who is strictly focused on performance, I want them to be able to function their best in this energy system. So that means I'm going to give them a lot of carbohydrates. I'm going to try to fuel their body for training. I'm going to try to fuel their body for recovery after training. And it's going to be largely carbohydrate focused. And so for those who are looking at, say, bodybuilding shows as far as reducing body fat as low as they can, or we're looking at, just losing weight, then this a lot of times is not going to be the ideal energy system for that person to reach their goals of reducing body fat or losing weight. And for this person, we're generally going to transition and try to get into that third energy system, which is going to be our oxidative system. And for this oxidative system, you can think of that as we're using fats for energy. So when someone is, say, on a lower carbohydrate diet and a higher fat intake, then this person needs to be conscious of the exercise intensity that they are working out with. Okay, so if you are on a high fat, low carb diet and you're trying to do a high intensity exercise bout over, say, an hour, odds are you're not going to have the energy available to sustain the intensity that you want to sustain during that workout because you just don't have enough carbohydrates, enough glycogen to sustain the exercise intensity. Okay, so for that individual, that means their body could overreach and they're not going to be using carbs or fats. And because there's not as much glycogen available to sustain the exercise intensity, and fats do not allow us to exercise at that same intensity level, then our body overreaches and we could potentially lose muscle tissue. And ultimately, what that does, it is going to decrease our metabolism. Okay, and that's what we want to avoid when we're dieting. We want to maintain our metabolism. We want to burn calories. We want to burn fat. And so we have to think about when we are training, what is our diet like? If our diet is primarily focused on carbohydrates, then we can train at a higher intensity. We can push the intervals on cardio. We can really push the weights in the gym. But if we are training or if we are eating a low carb, high fat diet, then we have to pull back on our intensity levels. And this might be where that person transitions from doing more interval based cardio when they're eating the high carbohydrate based diet and they're really just focusing on training performance, to now they're doing more steady state cardio where they're doing longer durations of cardio and keeping their heart rate a little bit lower for longer periods of time because the energy system they are using is more based on fats because they're on a low carb, high fat diet. And so, again, when we think about these three energy systems, we want to think about how we're dieting based on the goal that we're trying to obtain. So, again, if we are dieting on carbohydrates, usually our focus is going to be training in that glycolysis energy system. Okay, so that means our intensity could be higher if someone is an athlete focusing on body performance for their sport, or they're just focusing in the off season to grow muscle. Then we're going to use primarily a carbohydrate based diet. But as soon as someone transitions to dieting on fats, usually the focus is going to be on that oxidative system. So our exercise intensity is going to decrease, and we're going to make sure that we are not training at too high of an intensity so that our body doesn't overreach and we're able to give our body the proper fuels that it needs from that secondary energy system, which is fats, when the carbohydrates or glycogen is not available. So as you progress forward, when you think about the type of diet that we are utilizing with your plan at that point, if you find that your carbohydrates are dropping, which would be an indication if you do not have carbohydrates with every meal, or we might be doing a carb timing approach where you might just be having carbohydrates with breakfast and pre-workout, or say you're only having carbohydrates with pre-workout only, that would be considered a low carbohydrate based approach. And in that situation, you would want to focus more on lower or less intense forms of exercise. Now, if you are on these low carb diets, we would never go an extended period of time without having some sort of a high carb day. And what that high carb day's role is to replace the glycogen that we have taken out to put our bodies in more of a fat burning zone. And so by having that high carb day, we're reloading glycogen in the muscle so we can maintain that muscle and keep our metabolism elevated. So in that situation, after a high carb day, oftentimes people will feel more energy, and that means the exercise intensity can come back up for a couple of days. And so generally, say 2, maybe 3 days, you feel great, then that's a good sign that you can go ahead and train harder. But as soon as that fatigue starts to set in and you feel your energy drop a little bit, that's a good indication that your body is now transitioning more to that fat burning zone. And we do want to be conscious of the exercise intensity. We need to start lower that intensity again. So if someone's doing a carb rotation over, say, a 7-day, 1-week period where they're going 6 days of a low carb approach and they're going 1 day of a high carb day, and let's say Saturday is their high carb day or free meal, then that would indicate that on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you might have more energy to train harder. But then by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, when your energy has lowered, you're going to want to cut your exercise intensity back. And so as far as just thinking about what you're eating and how you want to train, that is the basis of how we would go about this.